Hi again then guys, and so we've got another Special Projects replica style build for you today, and on this particular occasion we're going for a car which is kind of similar to the one which we have on the game, but only to a certain point, in as much as it is the same vehicle underneath. It's based on the Audi R8 of course, because it is an Audi R8, but the car that we're replicating is the concept only R8 V12 TDi Le Mans concept, which had, of course, as the TDi suggests, a diesel V12 engine. Now, interestingly, it's actually less powerful than the V10 ended up being, but it has significantly more torque and just offers a completely different style of performance, of sound, of power delivery, etc. to the V8 or V10. Now, as far as the visuals, both of the Audi R8 road cars aren't that great as far as what you can do to them. There are no body upgrades, no wing upgrades. You can do the flat floor on the V8 version, but that's about it. So there's no real need to go over to the visual tuning garage. I would recommend doing this with the V10 version because you can get the torque output closer to the actual V12 TDi. You can also do this on the V8 version, but it won't be quite as accurate, basically. Now, I'd recommend getting a version of the car which has the darkest possible colour of side blades. I've gone for the one with the dark metallic grey side blades, but just that kind of thing, as dark as possible, because that's what the V12 concept has. As far as the colour of the body, obviously there are a lot of reds to go for, and the concept was also seen in silver, so if you want it to be accurate you've got two colour options. I went for the red, which is the better known colour for the car, and the red that I've gone for is Tornado Rot, which is Tornado Red from Mercedes. You don't have to go for that red, of course, that's just the one that I've opted for, and I have of course changed the rims, and the rims are Enki RP05 rims, and they come in a shade of chrome anyway. They're not completely accurate to the car's rims, unfortunately. Technically speaking, the stock rims on the V8 version are actually closer, but for the V10, the snowflake rims just don't look anything like the V12 TDi. So, that's pretty much it for the visual look. Relatively simple, as I said. So, of course, we'll go over to the tuning garage for the mechanical setup, and then, of course, take it out to a circuit to see how different it actually feels. Now, as far as the mechanical setup, I would usually like to get them as PP relevant as possible, but this is more of a pure fun tune rather than a competitive one, so it doesn't really matter as much on this car. Now, I've gone for sport soft tyres because, although it never reached the production stage, it would have been a street car. As far as the brakes, I have increased them to racing brakes, which is technically a bit of an overkill, so you don't have to do that. I just wanted it to feel improved over the V10. For the suspension, we've got the ride height on 100, front and rear. You could even go a little bit lower than that, but it looks appropriate, I think, to the V12, but of course adjust it as you see fit. For the springs, I've gone for 7 and 975, the dampers on 4, anti-roll on 3. You don't need any camber at all on this car because of the all-wheel drive. Neutral toe. We'll come back to the gearbox last, of course. For the diff, I have increased the initial torque at the front just a little to 10, just to keep that front end leading the car around corners. Acceleration as high as possible, as you can see. Braking as low as possible. I've gone for a 50-50 torque split. As far as power, obviously you want as much torque as possible, even though it has less power than the V10, so you want 493 horsepower, which is the actual horsepower of the real V12 concept. I have got an oil change on this car, and basically you want to fit quite a few other things so that while you can still have 493 horsepower, you can also have as much torque as possible, which is one of the reasons why I went for the mid RPM turbo, because it gives you the most torque. Now, we still don't have quite as much torque as the actual V12, but it's not too far off. It's a lot higher than the V8 at least. As far as bodywork, or the weight specifically, you can't adjust the downforce, and this is heavier than the normal model. Now, I've gone for window weight reduction. You don't have to do that though. I've added a 100 kilo ballast, put that all the way to the front, because this car does have a slightly better weight balance than the normal R8. And finally, for the gearbox, we are running the actual gears of the real car, which is a pretty long-range gearbox, given that it does have less power than you might expect. So you want an auto setting of 273, then for the individual gears 3667, 2077, 1473, 1133, 919 and 778 with a final drive of 3889. So that's it overall for the mechanical setup. It is a pretty high revving engine still, which is unfortunate, but there's nothing you can really do about that. So now let's finally take it out, of course, to a racetrack to see if it feels, looks and sounds the part. Now overall, there's only so similar to a V12 diesel version that you can get whilst using a petrol V10 or V8. So of course it's never going to be completely accurate in terms of how much torque it has, and especially the sound it makes. As far as revs, they are too high, you can't really do anything about that, but at least restricting it down severely does mean that that power and torque comes into play much lower. So at least that does make it a little bit more like the V12 in terms of the way it delivers its power and torque. The exhaust that I opted for with the car is primarily to make the sound in effect as deep as possible, or as anti-screamer as possible, because a diesel sounds nothing like the V10 and V8 version. It's much more gruff, much more monotone. Personally I like the sound, but I can understand why people wouldn't. So that's pretty much it overall. It handles very well, it's, as you'd expect, very quick, and certainly feels different to the V10 in its normal form. So if you decide to use this build, I hope you find it fun, potentially competitive, but that's not really what it's designed for. And if you'd like to keep up with other replicas like this, hit subscribe down below to do that. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.